In this piano tutorial, we will be learning 3 arpeggios that you can use as an exercise to practice your dexterity, specifically on the right hand when playing the piano. And these 3 arpeggios, I'm going to teach them in the key of C major, but you can obviously transpose them to other keys as well. That way you can get practice in all 12 keys, okay? Now, like I said, we will be focused more on the right hand. The left hand can simply stay on the first or the root, the fifth, and the octave, or the first, the fifth, and the 10th, right? I consider this sort of a drop 2 voicing, right? If we have the second inversion of C, I'm dropping C down an octave. That gives me that C, G, E voicing, right? But let's get into the arpeggios. This first arpeggio sounds something like this. Right, one more time. Now, this arpeggio it may seem complicated to someone who's just beginning, but it's not that complicated at all. It's actually a single chord being repeated throughout the piano. Now, the chord that I'm playing is actually C major, and I'm adding the octave up here. And then what happens is that I repeat this same chord up an octave. Up until the end of the piano. But the most important thing here to be able to do this in a fluid way, right, is the fingers or the specific fingers that we use for each key, and also our wrist movement and how we prepare each finger before playing the next key. For example, I'm using my thumb for C, my index finger for E, my middle finger for G, and then my pinky for the octave of C. But in order for me to get back up here with my thumb, I can't leave my thumb pressed down on this initial C, right? It's sort of going to prevent me from doing it in a fluid motion. I'm going to have to move my whole hand very rapidly, and that can cause some mistakes. So what I do is I'm playing C, E, but once I'm at G, my thumb is actually going to let go of this initial C, and it's sort of going to go under my hand, preparing itself to begin the arpeggio again up an octave, right? So that's how I get it to sound more fluid. You can see how I let go of my thumb and prepare it for the next C up an octave. And I recommend that you guys practice doing this with a metronome, right? You start very slow, and once you can do it without any mistakes, you start bringing up the BPM either by 10 or by 20, right? Something else that I'm doing is holding the sustain pedal. That way all the notes ring out. All right. So that's that first arpeggio, and it's very good. It serves as a way to practice your dexterity and your movement throughout the piano. Now, this next arpeggio is very similar to the first one in that we're playing the C major chord, but we're not only going to play this first or this root inversion, right? This root precision. We're also going to play the first inversion and the second inversion. And then we're going to go up back to the root position. And it sounds something like this. Right? So all I'm doing here, again, very similar to the first arpeggio. Like I said, playing the root position, first inversion, second inversion, and then repeat the root position up an octave. But again, the fingers that we use for each key is very important, right? So that first or that root position chord, I'm using the same fingers as in the beginning. But for the first inversion, which is E, G, C, and E, I'm actually going to use my thumb for E, my my index finger for G, but instead of using my middle finger for C, I'm actually going to use my ring finger, right? We're going to start incorporating this fourth finger, which is a little bit difficult sometimes for beginners, but this is a very good exercise to strengthen that finger. And also the reason why I'm using this fourth finger is because you can actually notice that the shape of this chord, the distance from G to C is it's slightly bigger than the distance from E to G, right? So it's easier for me to just play my ring finger for this chord. Now for the next inversion, which is G, C, E, and G, I actually use the same fingers as in the first or in the root position, right? I use my thumb, my index, my middle, and my pinky. And then we're back to the root position. So the only different one is the first inversion, right? And we're going to use that same technique of preparing our fingers for the next key, right? Once we play that initial C, my thumb is already on top or hovering over the E because that's the next key that I'm going to play with my thumb. And same goes for every other inversion of the same chord. Right, so you practice this with a metronome. And slowly raise up the BPM. Now this last arpeggio, right, is going to actually change a little bit. We're still in the key of C, but instead of playing a C major chord, we're actually going to play a pentatonic scale. And we're actually going to go from right to left as opposed from left to right. And so a quick reminder, the pentatonic scale is basically, let's say we have the C major scale. Pentatonic scale, penta means 5. So we're going to use 5 notes of this scale. And it's going to be the 1, the 2, the 3, the 5, and the 6, right? And this arpeggio sounds something like this. Right? We can start up from a little bit higher. Sorry, I messed that up. Now, what I'm doing here, again, maintaining that same concept of using the correct fingers to make it easier. What I'm playing is, very simply, for C, right, I'm going from right to left. For C, I actually start off with my middle finger. Slowly, only because it's easier for me to transition from my middle finger to the next fingers that I'm going to use, right? So for C, I use my middle finger, but then when I get to A, I use my index. Then for G, I use my thumb. Then for E, I'm going to go over with my middle finger and press down, then my index finger on D, then my thumb on C. And then we simply keep repeating that pattern, right? Index, thumb, middle, index, thumb, right? So this grouping right here is the thumb, the index, and the middle finger. And then this grouping right here is going to be the thumb and the index, right? So technically we can begin with the thumb on C. But I usually start off with the middle finger just to make it easier, an easier transition from middle finger to index, right? And you can actually also start off from G. For example, we can start off on G with the with the pinky, and then we continue on with the regular fingerings, right? So I started pinky, then middle, index, thumb, middle, index, thumb, and so on. And you can actually go from left to right as well if you want to make the exercise a little bit tougher, right? But the important thing here is that you're always preparing your fingers for the next key, right? So one thing I want to do now is actually go back to one of the previous arpeggios and sort of share something that I discovered, not discovered, right? It's been discovered before, but something that I learned as I was practicing the arpeggio, right? So let's say we have a C major 7 chord, right? I always talk about this in my tutorials, how these major 7 or major 9 chords are actually, or I consider them a combination of 2 different chords. For example, C major 7 is a combination of C major and E minor. So this gives us the option right now with these arpeggios to be able to play a C major with my left hand, but my right hand is actually going to play the arpeggio in E minor. For example, the first arpeggio was this one, where we go up an octave playing that root position for the chord, right? So we get this C major 7 sound while using 2 different chords. We can even use the second arpeggio for the same chord. We can actually even make it a C major 9, right? A C major 9 is a combination of C major and G major. So we can play an arpeggio with the G major on our right hand, and then our left hand is simply playing the C major chord. We can even use the G major pentatonic, for example, to play over C. See how it sounds. Right, so that opens up the possibilities of different arpeggios, different runs that we can do with these basic chords, right? So hopefully this lesson was helpful to you. If you want to share it with someone to help them out, these are very simple exercises that you can use and slowly better your dexterity on the piano.